Chapter 1756. On this short flight of stairs, Gu Xingyin was blocked several times. Those ghosts did not seem to want them to go upstairs at all. Although Gu Xingyin was a little nervous, the hope in her heart grew. In her opinion, the more these ghosts behaved like this, the more likely there was something incredible upstairs. Finally, they stepped onto the last step of the second floor. Gu Xingyin heaved a sigh of relief. She looked sideways at the long and old corridor. With just one look, her heart sank. At the end of the corridor, an old lady with a face full of wrinkles was looking at them expressionlessly. This old lady did not have a ghostly aura. She was wearing a long black dress, and her expression was harsh and strict. She looked like an old madam from a wealthy family in ancient dramas. However, she appeared in a place like this and dressed like this. Even if Gu Xingyin believed that she was not a ghost, she could not do it. The only explanation was that this old lady, who did not have a hint of ghostly aura, was a ghost that was scarier than the ghosts downstairs. This realization made Gu Xingyin shudder. The other people also looked at the old lady with vigilance. The next moment, they were shocked to find that the old lady, who was standing far away at the end of the corridor, had appeared in front of them. Gu Xingyin felt a chill in her heart. Although the ghosts downstairs appeared and disappeared mysteriously, she could still see their movements. However, even with her psychic eye, she could not see the old lady's movements clearly. It was as if she had really teleported here. The only hope now was that the talisman given by the system would be effective on her. Fortunately, the old lady only came to their side, but did not touch them directly. The system said confidently, "Host, please rest assured. The Guanyin soul-subduing talisman produced by the system is of absolute quality. Not to mention a ghost of this level, even a ghost king would not be able to break it." All right. Gu Xingyin sighed in relief. A reprieve was more hopeful than a direct death sentence. Upon closer inspection, one could see that the old lady's complexion was green. It was not the color of a living person's skin. Looking down, he could see spots of yellow livor mortis on the back of her shriveled hand. However, compared to the group of ghosts downstairs, the old lady's appearance was much more normal. Moreover, she didn't seem to have much of an appetite for them. Yes, appetite. Gu Xingyin thought about the way the female statue and the other ghosts looked at them. It was as if they were drooling over delicious food. It was very uncomfortable to look at them. However, this old lady was different. The way she looked at him was not like she was looking at food, but like she was looking at a stranger who had disturbed her. There was only disgust. The old lady stood some distance away from the crowd and actually began to speak. Her voice was like an old tree bark that had been dried up for countless years. When it was swept up by the north wind, it let out a hoarse and painful cry, making people who heard it couldn't help but have goosebumps. "Humans, this is not a place for you to come. Get down." She spoke slowly but clearly. This old lady seemed to still retain a relatively clear consciousness. However, her words were somewhat unacceptable to the crowd. Get down. Who didn't know that there was a group of malicious ghosts waiting for them downstairs? Going down to die. Chapter 1757. Gu Xingyin said calmly, "It was an accident that we came to this place. We also want to leave this castle very much. Do you have any way to get us out of here?" As soon as she asked, the rest of the people also pricked up their ears. What if they were lucky enough to meet a kind-hearted ghost who didn't like to eat people and sent them out? Then they heard the old woman's cold voice. "Every 10 days, there will be an alternation between the living and the dead in this castle. That is also the only time when living people can come in. Since you are unlucky enough to come here, don't think about getting out before the next alternation between the living and the dead." Everyone felt a chill in their hearts when they heard that. At the same time, they admired Gu Xingyin more and more in their hearts. It was just as she had predicted. They would have to stay in this place for at least 10 days before they could get out. Seeing that the old woman didn't seem to have any intention of being enemies with them, Zhang Chao mustered up his courage and said, "Madam, can we borrow your place and stay for a few days? After 9 days we will get out." The old woman slowly turned her head to look at Zhang Chao. Everyone was almost in a circle, and Zhang Chao happened to be in the opposite direction of Gu Xingyin. Everyone saw that her body didn't move, but her head seemed to turn in a circle and looked straight at Zhang Chao. This strange scene caused Zhang Chao to shiver. It was too creepy. The old woman's voice suddenly became sharp. No. Living people are not allowed to enter here. You must leave immediately, leave this place. Gu Xingyin said. There are countless malicious ghosts who want our lives. We can't go down to die. The old woman suddenly laughed strangely. An extremely sharp fingernail suddenly grew out of her hands. Looking at everyone coldly, the old woman's eyes flashed with a strange light. Do you think that I won't kill you if you stay on the second floor? Seeing the old woman's appearance, she frowned. This development was not right. If this old woman on the second floor, who was obviously more powerful, also knew how to kill, how did Qin Qingqing survive? Gu Xingyin felt a little confused. It wasn't a good feeling to think that you had found hope, only to have reality give you a cold slap. She forced herself to calm down. There must be something wrong. There must be a way. Gu Xingyin tried to reason with the old woman. We don't mean any harm, and we won't disturb your life. We just want to find a place to stay for a while. Why can't you tolerate us? However, the old woman couldn't listen to him at all. She just coldly told them to scram. Gu Xingyin simply ignored her. She said to her companions behind her, It seems that my guess is wrong. The second floor doesn't give us any hope. She sounded apologetic. Unexpectedly, this time, Qin Qingqing was the first to comfort her. It doesn't matter. Not to mention anything else, at least compared to the dancing demons in the hall, this place isn't so unsightly. As soon as she said this, everyone couldn't help but laugh. That was true. On the entire second floor, other than the dark corridor, it seemed that the old woman was the only ghost that existed. Chapter 1758. Gu Xingyin's eyes slowly scanned the entire second floor. They were now at the top of the stairs that led up from the first floor. The stairs stopped here. Where they were, there were only a few mottled walls. And then there was a corridor that extended endlessly to the other side. Gu Xingyin thought for a moment. If Qin Qingqing in the original plot ran up the stairs that they had walked up, then, as a lunatic with mental problems, the most likely thing she would do was to run forward when she saw the road. There was no road here, so there was only a corridor left. Could it be that there was a secret at the end of the corridor? Gu Xingyin glanced around. The corridor was like a dim passage, and the place where the old woman first appeared was at the end of the corridor. Gu Xingyin said in a low voice, Are you willing to follow me to the end? Since this is not our destination, let's continue forward. They all expressed that there was no problem. The old woman seemed to have heard their words. She said sharply, You're not allowed to leave. Get down, get down. However, she could only scream. She tried to attack Gu Xingyin and the others, but every time, before she could touch anyone, there would be bursts of black smoke on her hand, accompanied by a burning pain. No one had been able to bring her pain for thousands of years. Seeing the old woman like this, her heart calmed down. She can't hurt us. We still have enough time. Take it slow. We'll find a way. She slowly walked towards the corridor. The old woman tried to stop them again and again, even if it meant that she would get injured again and again. Moreover, as they walked forward, the doors of the rooms in the corridor opened one by one. One by one, stiff people walked out and blocked their way expressionlessly. Qin Qingqing almost screamed. Could it be that the old woman wasn't the only ghost on the second floor? Gu Xingyin, on the other hand, scanned with her spiritual eye and found that the corridor was empty. These things were all illusions made by the old woman to stop them. All of you, close your eyes. These are all illusions. Just hold on to me and follow me. She shouted loudly. These illusions were too realistic. She was afraid that those people would take them seriously. Everyone did as they were told. Although they didn't know how Gu Xingyin knew that these were all illusions, they were already used to listening to her. Everyone walked forward slowly. Gu Xingyin looked at this dark and quiet corridor, and there were always all kinds of illusions. For example, as they walked, a chandelier suddenly fell down on their heads, as if in the next moment, they would be bleeding. Or perhaps the floor would suddenly collapse, and there would be cold knife tips below. If they fell, their intestines would be pierced through. Without the psychic eye, Gu Xingyin felt that he probably wouldn't have been able to get out of the illusion. She knew a lot about illusions. She knew that as long as one's heart was shaken, the environment would take advantage of it. In such an environment, once they fell into the illusion, this old woman probably had more than 100 ways to take their lives without touching them. Gu Xingyin ignored the old woman's disbelief and resentment. Finally, she walked to the end of the corridor without changing her expression. The moment she stepped into the end, she thought she had walked into heaven. Chapter 1759. It was just the difference between taking a step forward and taking a step back. It was like the difference between heaven and hell. Gu Xingyin stared at the scene in front of her for a long time in a daze. The others had their eyes closed. Now that they felt that Gu Xingyin suddenly stopped moving, they all felt strange and opened their eyes. Then, they couldn't help but open their mouths. What appeared in front of everyone was warm and bright light. A sparkling and translucent crystal staircase appeared under everyone's feet. On every step, the same transparent pattern was engraved, reflecting a beautiful light under the light. On both sides of the staircase, there were fresh flowers with dew, blooming in the most beautiful moment of their lives. The crystal staircase wound up, making it impossible for people to see the scene behind, but it didn't make people feel afraid. It only made people yearn for it. Who knew what kind of scenery would be at the bottom of this exquisite staircase? Qin Qingqing looked at the perfumed lily in a vase not far in front of her, and had the urge to cry. Although she had only been here for a short day, she felt as if she was a lifetime away from the normal life she had before. She couldn't help but want to reach out and touch the petals in front of her. But her arm was pulled hard by Zhang Chao. Zhang Chao frowned and looked at her. Are you crazy? You dare to believe the things in this place? Qin Qingqing recalled the scene in the hall. She suddenly shuddered and woke up from her trance. Everyone looked at Gu Xingyin. Gu Xingyin looked carefully for a long time and finally said slowly, "No, these are not illusions." Under everyone's widened eyes, she gave a definite answer. "These are all real." Shuewang couldn't help but cover her mouth with her hand. This was really too shocking. Perhaps the scene in front of them was too shocking. For a moment, everyone didn't know what to do. They could only look at Gu Xingyin. Gu Xingyin turned her head. She saw that the solemn and gloomy old woman was looking at them with hatred. She was standing in the shadows not far from everyone. The two sides were in two completely different worlds. One step into heaven, one step into hell. That's not a place you should go. Come out. The old woman called out to them in a hoarse voice. However, she was obviously worried about something and didn't dare to approach him. Gu Xingyin suddenly felt relieved. She thought that she had probably found the reason why Qin Qingqing was still alive. In the original plot, Qin Qingqing probably stumbled into this place by accident. She burst out laughing. This time, it wasn't to pretend to be calm. Instead, it was a genuine smile of relief. She said, "Everyone let go. I think we're probably safe now." Everyone was overjoyed to hear this. Zhang Chao said hesitantly, "Leng Shi, are you sure?" Chapter 1760. Everyone sat on the ground, and the two girls no longer looked lonely as they sat down on the ground. They slowly took out the food in their backpacks. For the first time in a day and night, they finished a meal normally. As Qin Qingqing ate, she suddenly started crying. She was still biting the bread in her mouth. As she ate, she cried, "I never knew that sitting and eating bread like this was such a blissful thing." She really didn't look good like this, but no one laughed at her. Because almost everyone's eyes turned red when they looked at Qin Qingqing. Only Gu Xingyin was still eating slowly with a calm expression. Then, she realized that everyone was looking at her. Gu Xingyin's first reaction was, did something appear behind her again? She didn't look back. She quickly rolled on the ground and left the area she was previously in. Then, she looked up and saw nothing. Gu Xingyin. She looked at everyone. "Why are you looking at me?" The other 5 people were obviously stunned by her actions just now. They were stunned for a while before they realized that Gu Xingyin had misunderstood something. Ha 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 ha. There was a burst of laughter. They felt that they hadn't laughed so happily in a long time. Zhang Chao finally stopped laughing. He wiped the tears from the corner of his eyes. "Leng Shi, don't misunderstand. There are no ghosts here. We just feel that we are really grateful to you along the way. If it weren't for you, We really don't know how many times we would have died. After he said this, the others couldn't help but nod. Qin Qingqing also said, "Thank you so much, Sister Lungshi. I know that my personality isn't good, but under such circumstances, you didn't abandon me. I'm really grateful." The others also expressed their gratitude. Even Qin Ge, who had always been silent, had a stiff face and thanked Gu Xingyin. After this incident, the estrangement between them seemed to have lessened a lot. Gu Xingyin glanced at the corridor and found that the old woman had disappeared. Most likely, he knew that there was nothing he could do to them, so he left. Qin Qingqing noticed Gu Xingyin's actions and also raised her head to take a look. She suddenly stood up and walked up a few steps, keeping her gaze away from the corridor. "It wasn't easy for me to relax. I don't want to see those things again," she complained. Everyone felt that this was the case. Thus, all of them went up a few steps and left the dim corridor behind. At this moment, Qin Qingqing suddenly looked up. She whispered, "I don't know what's on top of it." As soon as she said this, the others also became restless. Then, they all looked at Gu Xingyin. Along the way, they seemed to have gotten used to letting Gu Xingyin be their leader. Gu Xingyin was curious as well. She asked the system, "System, do you know what's at the top of the stairs?" The system shook its head very honestly. "I don't know." Gu Xingyin. The system expressed that it was very innocent. The system has no way of knowing things that didn't appear in the plot. Chapter 1761. As soon as Gu Xingyin came back to her senses, she met 5 pairs of inquiring eyes. She thought for a moment and said, "Everyone is very tense today and should be in a rather tired state now. How about this? Let's take a rest first and have a good sleep. When we're well rested, we'll go up and explore. What do you think?" The others also thought that this was a good idea. Gu Xingyin assigned them casually. "Start with me, then Zhang Chao, Qin Qingqing Qin Ge, and then Shuowan. You two decide yourselves. Each of you will guard for an hour. Rest well first, then we'll talk about other things." No matter how safe this place looked, they still had to be vigilant. Okay. The crystal steps were very spacious, and each step was more than enough for one person to sleep. Because of the peace of mind, and the heavy shackles in their hearts were removed, everyone fell asleep immediately. Gu Xingyin quietly looked at this almost illusory scene alone, and secretly prayed that there would be no more twists and turns. Time passed quickly. After everyone had slept their fill, everyone stood up energetically. Gu Xingyin still took the lead. She held a dagger in her hand and slowly walked forward. Nothing unexpected happened. There would be a turn after every 9 steps. Gu Xingyin counted every turn he took until he reached the 9th turn. Finally, there were no more spiral steps in front of him. They had reached the end. Gu Xingyin clenched the dagger in her hand and said in a low voice, "Everyone be careful." Everyone expressed that they understood. Then they slowly made their way to the top. What greeted their eyes was, it was a very big room. The floor of this room was covered with a thick lavender velvet carpet. On the left wall, there was a huge Western-style wall clock. The room was very orderly. The people present might not be able to recognize every piece of furniture and decoration, but they could see the nobility and luxury with their eyes. It could be imagined that the owner of this room should be a person of high status, who paid great attention to the quality of life. Qin Qingqing suddenly exclaimed in a small voice. Everyone followed her gaze. It turned out that there was a huge oil painting hanging on the wall on the right, probably above the main chair for receiving guests. Due to the position they occupied after ascending the stairs, they did not see this at first glance. This was a man who could easily take away everyone's breath and gaze. His long black hair was tied up high, revealing a pair of eyes that were even more mysterious and enchanting than the most beautiful amethyst. His facial features were so deep and perfect that they seemed to have been carefully sculpted. The corners of his lips curled up slightly, as if he had seen something that made him happy. Continuing to look, the person in the painting was riding on a white horse. In his hand was a longbow inlaid with gems. Obviously, he was hunting. Judging from his joyful expression, he must have hunted a decent prey. Looking at his riding attire, it was obvious that this attire was from at least a few centuries ago. It should have been a painter back then who had faithfully recorded this scene. What a beautiful person, Qin Qingqing murmured. Her eyes lit up. Compared to the people in this painting, the few male celebrities I've chased before are simply repulsive. Everyone nodded in deep agreement. Zhang Chao muttered. Maybe the painter deliberately painted him to look good in order to please this aristocrat. Chapter 1762. Qin Qingqing rolled her eyes at him. I don't believe that a painter from hundreds of years ago has such a good imagination. Gu Xingyin watched the two of them bicker. She silently looked at the scene in the room. This place was actually very abnormal. Not just here. In fact, it should be said that from the beginning of the crystal stairs, everything was very abnormal. There was no doubt that this was an ancient castle that had existed for hundreds, or even thousands of years. Moreover, looking at the appearance of the first and second floors, it was impossible for anyone to come here. Then, how did those crystal stairs remain untouched after thousands of years? Where did those lights come from? How could there be lights hundreds of years ago? What was even more ridiculous were those flowers with dew on them. What kind of flowers could not rot after thousands of years? The situation in the room above was the same as on the stairs. The carpet was clean. The chairs and tea sets were not even a trace of dust. The oil paintings seemed to have just been hung up. All of this seemed to have been frozen in time, at the most beautiful moment. The problem now was that Gu Xingyin knew that there was a problem everywhere. But she did not feel any danger. She also did not feel anything wrong. Moreover, from this room, except for the stairs below, there was no exit or door. There was only a living room and a small bathroom. There was not even a bedroom. No matter how she looked at it, it was very strange. The others were obviously not fools. However, after Gu Xingyin said it out loud, no one dared to touch anything inside, even though they were elated. Gu Xingyin looked around and said, I can't see through the mystery of this. Everyone, don't touch anything inside. We'll stay here for 10 days and go out when the time is up. This was the safest way. The others nodded. They sat at the top of the crystal steps and slowly waited for time to pass. The happiest thing was that there was a bathroom. God knew how long they had been holding it in. However, they were still a little scared. Even going to the bathroom was a private matter in pairs. No one knew what would happen if they were alone. Just like that, 3 days passed by peacefully. Everyone was already very familiar with this place, and their hearts relaxed. There was really no danger, and the velvet carpet was quite comfortable to sleep on. That night, Gu Xingyin, who was sleeping soundly, suddenly woke up in a daze. There was no night here, and the room was always as bright as day. Gu Xingyin could only confirm that it was night by looking at the time on her watch. She stood up in a daze and wanted to go to the bathroom. Unexpectedly, Qing Gu, who was sleeping in front of her, suddenly turned over, and Gu Xingyin's feet tripped over. Gu Xingyin lost his balance for a moment and fell straight to the ground. She knocked her forehead on the mahogany coffee table in front of her. So painful. Gu Xingyin only felt a severe headache accompanied by dizziness. She could not help but groan. The others were also awakened by the commotion. Qing Gu was the first to wake up. Seeing Gu Xingyin's appearance, he hurriedly helped her up. I'm sorry, Lungshi, I didn't expect. Qing Gu was very embarrassed. Gu Xingyin waved her hand. She could only blame her bad luck. She did not notice that her blood stained the mahogany furniture and actually slowly seeped into it. Chapter 1763. Gu Xingyin got herself some clean water to wipe her wound. There was no disinfectant or clean cotton balls. She could only hope that there wouldn't be any stubborn bacteria on this 1,000-year-old mahogany furniture. She felt someone shake her from behind and couldn't help but say, Qing Gu, don't shake me. Qing Ji's inexplicable voice came out. I didn't shake you. Gu Xingyin's heart tightened. Then not only her, but everyone else also felt the shaking. It wasn't people who were shaking, but the ground. What is going on? Is there an earthquake? The white-collar man Li Chong said. Gu Xingyin, even if you used your toes to think, you would know that there couldn't be such a thing as an earthquake. The ground shook so much that they could only hold hands and stick close to each other to avoid being separated. In a place they couldn't see, on the first floor, The malicious spirits that had scared the 6 of them half to death were now cowering in a corner, shivering. The entire hall was filled with the sound of ghosts howling. Those malicious spirits felt that a powerful force was slowly awakening. That power. These ghosts felt that the owner of that power could easily kill them with just a thought. A few of the more powerful ones, led by the female statue ghost, who even had a trace of consciousness, were gathered together to discuss in a low voice. This power. Could it be the legendary Duke? The old woman holding the crowbar said slowly. After she said this, a look of fear appeared on the pale faces of the ghosts. They all disappeared into the darkness. Hopefully this wasn't true? Second floor. The old woman was already kneeling on the ground, kowtowing in the direction of the stairs at the end of the corridor. She had actually lost a lot of her memories, but she had an instinctive respect and fear for this power. The only ones who were calm were the 6 people who didn't know anything. The sound of the ground shaking slowly stopped. Everything returned to normal. Qin Qingqing heaved a sigh of relief and raised her head. It finally stopped. I was worried that if this place collapsed, and we fell down to the first floor. Her voice was stuck in her throat. Not only her, but everyone was shocked by the scene in front of them. The earthquake just now seemed to have turned on some unknown switch. The entire room had undergone a huge change. The room that was originally surrounded by walls had a window. They could see the clear sky and white soft clouds outside. If they remembered correctly, the sky of this ancient castle had always been gray. They couldn't even see the sun. Where did the blue sky and white clouds come from? What was most inconceivable was that on the wall opposite them, several doors appeared. Doors. There was a handle made of gold and copper on them. They didn't doubt that they could open the door with a slight twist. Then they saw something brand new. This. Qin Qingqing swallowed her saliva. What kind of place have we come to? No one answered her. No one could answer this question. Even Gu Xingyin didn't know. At this moment, everyone was shocked to find that the door suddenly turned. That door moved on its own without anyone else moving. There was only one explanation: there was someone on the other side of the door. Everyone held their breaths. Chapter 1764. Gu Xingyin noticed that someone had grabbed her sleeve. She didn't turn around to see who it was, because she was also nervous. The door opened quietly. A pair of black boots appeared in front of everyone. They looked up. Her long and slender legs were wrapped in tight dark-colored trousers. Above her knees, there was a purple shirt quietly hanging down. Looking up, there was a set of clothes with a very strange design. Looking up, there was a set of clothes with a very strange design. Looking up. Everyone's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't because this pale-faced man had a handsome face that seemed to gather the spirit energy of heaven and earth. But everyone couldn't help but turn to look at the oil painting on the wall. This person looked exactly the same as the person in the oil painting. Did a 1,000-year-old ghost come back to life? The man's gaze swept across everyone, and then accurately stopped on Gu Xingyin. Then he slowly smiled. Qin Qingqing only felt her body heat up, and then something flowed down her nose. She subconsciously reached out to touch it. Blood. She actually had a nosebleed from looking at a man's smile. Qin Qingqing felt that she was quite useless. But this man was really beautiful. Then, Qin Qingqing only felt her eyes blur, and that extremely impactful handsome face appeared in front of her. How much of an impact would such an enlarged extreme beauty have on a person who was obsessed with looks? Qin Qingqing couldn't answer, because she felt that she was having difficulty breathing, and the nosebleed seemed to be faster. However, this beauty didn't look at her. Everyone stared blankly as this strangely handsome man blinked his eyes and appeared beside them as if he had teleported. And then, he half knelt in front of Leng Shi, and a dreamy gentle smile appeared on his face. "I finally waited for you, my bride." Everyone. What kind of strange development was this? They all looked at Gu Xingyin strangely. However, Gu Xingyin couldn't answer them, because she herself was also dumbfounded. She tried to call the system. "System, can you explain?" Actually, the moment the man appeared, she sensed a familiar soul aura from him. She knew that this man was her lover, but she couldn't understand what kind of script this was. Bride. Who would call someone a bride the moment they met? What if she didn't come? Would he still call someone else his bride? The system did not answer her. Then, the mysterious man tilted his head and suddenly asked in a soft voice, "Are you talking to someone? My bride?" Gu Xingyin felt a chill in his heart. This was the first time she had met someone who could sense the existence of the system. Although this man looked very mysterious, strange, and powerful, it was hard for Gu Xingyin to feel nervous when he was surrounded by the familiar lotus fragrance. She looked at the man calmly. "Who are you? I've never seen you, and I'm not your bride." Chapter 1765. The man obviously noticed Gu Xingyin's gaze. She was fascinated by him. Accepting this knowledge, the man's smile became even more joyful. He reached out his fair and slender fingers and gently touched the scar on Gu Xingyin's left forehead. Gu Xingyin could feel the slight coolness of his fingers. It didn't hurt when he touched the wound. Instead, it was very comfortable. She couldn't see it, but the others could clearly see that after the mysterious man put his fingers on Leng Shi's wound and gently rubbed it twice, the wound that was originally bruised and swollen had miraculously disappeared. The man was very tall. Even if he was half kneeling, he still looked taller than the others. He bent down and stared at Gu Xingyin. "How can I mistake my bride? From the beginning to the end, there will be no one but you." The others sitting by the side. They felt that they were a little redundant standing here. Gu Xingyin tilted her head and avoided his fingers. It wasn't because she didn't like it, but because she felt the cold touch on her forehead itchy. However, the man's eyes darkened because of her avoidance. She seemed to be rejecting him. Gu Xingyin stared at him seriously and asked, "I still don't know who you are." The man glanced at her, and then glanced at the others sitting on the ground. He said in a low voice, "Get up and tidy up, my bride. You're in such a sorry state now." Gu Xingyin was embarrassed when she heard this. Leng Shi and the others came from the city to this castle. After a day and night of escaping in a sorry state, they obviously didn't look very good at the moment. If people were in a situation where they had to worry about their own safety at all times, they naturally wouldn't think more. But now it was obvious that they were out of danger. Hearing the man's words, Gu Xingyin also felt a little uncomfortable with the sticky feeling on her body. She asked bluntly, "Do you have a bathroom and a change of clothes here? I want to take a shower." The others couldn't help but sweat for her when they heard her words. This mysterious man who suddenly appeared was obviously very powerful. They didn't even know who he was. How dare Leng Shi order him around so confidently? What if she annoyed him? However, no one could understand Gu Xingyin's confidence. She knew that what they were worried about wouldn't happen. Sure enough, hearing Gu Xingyin's words, the man's expression obviously became happy. Of course, this castle has always been prepared for its mistress. He stood up first, then bent down and reached out his hand to Gu Xingyin. Gu hesitated for a moment. She wondered if she needed to be more reserved. Then, she raised her head and met the man's mysterious eyes that were as dark as violets. He had been waiting for her hand. Gu Xingyin blinked. Without much hesitation, he succumbed to her beauty. They were an old couple. To hell with being reserved. Chapter 1766. To be honest, looking at the way the two of them interacted, it was impossible to tell that they had just met for the first time. Zhang Chao frowned worriedly. "Are we just going to let Leng Shi leave? Will anything happen to her?" Shui Wan rolled her eyes at him and said, "What are you men's eyes for? Didn't you see the way that handsome guy looked at Leng Shi? It was so gentle that he wanted to give the whole world to her. Would such a person hurt Leng Shi? Besides," Shui Wan complained, "even if he really wants to harm Leng Shi, if it's someone Leng Shi can't handle, do you think it'll be of any use even if we follow?" Zhang Chao. He was speechless. In the room, Gu Xingyin followed the man in and realized that it was a huge bedroom. The room was also covered with a thick purple velvet carpet, and even the curtains were purple. Looking at the man's dark purple robe, Gu Xingyin had a certain understanding of the man's preferences. She slowly looked around the bedroom. As someone who had once owned a castle, she had a good eye and could tell that the style of this bedroom was extremely luxurious. Fortunately, the owner of the bedroom had good taste. Although it was luxurious, it didn't feel tacky at all. However, no matter how she looked at it, It didn't look like an ownerless bedroom. She raised her head and voiced her doubts. From what I see, this bedroom doesn't look like a guest room. Guest room? The man asked. He smiled and shook his head. How can my bride go to the guest room? This is my master bedroom, of course, he smiled teasingly. This is also your master bedroom. Gu Xingyin was calm in the face of such blatant flirting. After knowing the location of the bathroom, and confirming that she could use it, she mercilessly kicked him out. I'm going to take a shower now. Get out. She didn't hesitate to ask him to leave. Since he said that this was her master bedroom, she could use her rights as the mistress. The man wasn't angry at all. He walked out of the bedroom cooperatively, and closed the door for Gu Xingyin considerately. Gu Xingyin watched him walk out before she turned around and smiled. Outside the door. After he stepped out of the door, the man's expression changed instantly. In front of outsiders, he restrained his affectionate gentleness, and his expression carried a trace of indifference. Dear guests who have come from afar, that is the guest room of the castle. There is a change of clothes inside. You can go and freshen up. As he spoke, he pointed in a certain direction. Then, following his movements, the entire wall on the other side suddenly extended out, and a magnificent corridor appeared in front of everyone. On both sides of the corridor were identical rooms. In everyone's eyes, this scene was completely like an audit. However, after experiencing what had happened on the first 2 floors, everyone was traumatized by the existence of the corridor. The 5 of them looked at each other, but no one dared to take a step forward. The man tilted his head and looked at them in confusion. He suddenly looked at Qingge, who was closest to him. Qingge felt his mind go blank. In just a moment, he felt as if everything in his mind had been seen by someone. Chapter 1767. It was at this moment that the man understood why they didn't move. He frowned slightly. If anyone who knew him was here, they would know that the Violet Duke never showed his emotions on his face. Frowning like this was already a sign of extreme anger. He was indeed angry, but not because of these people, but because of the foul atmosphere downstairs. He had only slept for a short 1,000 years, and these cats and dogs dared to come to his place and behave atrociously? What he couldn't stand most was not that they were behaving atrociously here, but because they had frightened Gu Xingyin. He was going to deal with them directly, but then an idea formed in his mind. Qingge was looking at him in horror. He could feel that in that moment, everything in his mind had been seen by the man in front of him. This was simply too terrifying. What kind of existence was he? Of course, the man couldn't answer him. He just said, "You don't have to be afraid here. In this world, no one can hurt my guests." He didn't say it loudly, but the confidence in his words was very strong. Everyone looked at each other. In the end, Qin Qingqing was the first to stand up and thank him. Then she pulled Shui Wan into the first room closest to the hall. The other 3 men looked at each other and decisively entered the same room. They definitely didn't have the courage to enter a room alone. In the whole living room, only the man was left sitting there quietly. Above his head was the painting of a white horse with a bow. Contrasting with the painting, he actually had the illusion that he had traveled through time. However, he did travel through time. At this moment, he suddenly thought of something. The corners of his mouth curled into a smile, and his figure instantly disappeared on the spot. When he reappeared, he was already in the bedroom. He gently knocked on the bathroom door, and his soft and deep voice directly entered Gu Xingyin's ears. "My beautiful bride, I think you may need my help at this moment." The bathroom was silent for a moment. Then the door was opened from the inside. Gu Xingyin stood at the door with a towel wrapped around his body. Hot steam seeped out of the bathroom. She looked at the man, and didn't ask him how he knew she was thinking about him. She just said, "I didn't take the clothes, and I don't know where the clothes you prepared for me are." The man's eyes fell on her exposed shoulders, and his eyes darkened for a moment. He smiled gently and said, "Come with me." He led Gu Xingyin to a gorgeous wardrobe and pulled it open. In an instant, a pile of clothes appeared in front of Gu Xingyin. Gu Xingyin could clearly see that the wardrobe was divided into 2 distinct sections from the middle. It was obvious that one section was for men, and the other for women. However, their styles were all gorgeous and flamboyant, just like the man in front of her. A beautiful wardrobe had always been a woman's favorite. Gu Xingyin couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. The man tilted his head and smiled at her. This wardrobe has been waiting for its mistress for thousands of years. He reached out and picked out a set of clothes for Gu Xingyin. I'll go out first. Take your time to change, he said as he tapped Gu Xingyin's forehead. Chapter 1768. Gu Xingyin felt that something suddenly appeared in her mind. She looked at the man in front of her emotionally, as if she didn't expect him to be so considerate. The man reached out his hand to cover her eyes and whispered in her ear. Don't look at me like that. Gu Xingyin didn't understand, and then she heard the next sentence. I can't help it. Gu Xingyin. The trace of emotion that had just risen disappeared without a trace. She only felt a soft and cold touch on her forehead. Of course she knew what it was. Then the hand on her eyes was released, and she couldn't see the man when she looked up again. Gu Xingyin couldn't help but smile and whisper, Why did you run away after kissing me? The man sitting in the living room suddenly showed a helpless smile. You can't wrong me. If I didn't run away, you might not be able to get out tonight. Gu Xingyin found that the man took out a complete set of clothes, and there were even undergarments inside. After exclaiming his thoughtfulness again, she slowly picked up the clothes and put them on one by one. That's right. The man just touched her eyebrows to tell her how to put on these clothes. After finally putting them on, Gu Xingyin looked at herself in the huge carved dressing mirror in the bedroom. At a glance, she understood the man's trick, the style, the color and the material. It was exactly the same as the man's. It was really Gu Xingyin held her forehead and laughed first. Such a strong and arrogant lover. It's really very tempting. She gently pushed the door open and walked out. The man sitting in the living room immediately looked at her. Seeing him looking at her without blinking, Gu Xingyin walked to him and turned around. What's wrong? Don't I look good? The next moment, her waist was held by a pair of strong arms, and she fell into the arms full of cold fragrance. The man gently buried his head in her fair and beautiful neck. He took a deep breath and murmured, I'm sorry, but I'm sorry. No, it's very beautiful. So beautiful that I regret it. Gu Xingyin was a little confused. Regret? She wanted to raise her head, but the man used force on the male lead. Yes, regret. Such a beautiful sure, of course. Should only be seen by me alone. His soft and gentle voice was like the prelude played by the most elegant cello. It could easily make people sink into it. Gu Xingyin allowed herself to sink into it. When the other 5 people finished washing up and walked out of the room, the first thing they saw was this. The slender man and woman were hugging each other like a pair of tangled mandarin ducks. Qin Qingqing whispered, Did we appear at the wrong time? When she said this, she felt a little depressed. She recognized that the man was that mysterious and powerful handsome man, but she had never seen the woman before. This beauty was clearly calling Leng Shi his bride earlier, but it had only been a short while, and he was already hugging another woman. Sure enough, men were creatures that could not be trusted at all. At this moment, Qin Qingqing had completely forgotten that there was no other woman in this castle. Then, she saw the man and woman separate and look over. Qin Qingqing. That was actually Leng Shi. In their hearts, if it weren't for Gu Xingyin, they wouldn't have made it here alive. Not to mention, there was still a chance to leave this place alive. Therefore, they could not abandon Gu Xingyin and go out alone at this time. Zhang Chao said, The 6 of us came together. Of course we will leave together. The others nodded as well. Gu Xingyin's heart warmed when she saw this. It was a great feeling to see his kindness being reciprocated in kind. She glanced at the man and suddenly said with a smile, You can leave first. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine here. Chapter 1770. Hearing Gu Xingyin's words, everyone looked like they wanted to say something. They didn't expect that the man didn't say anything, but Leng Shi did. Looking at the long dress she was wearing, which was obviously the same as the mysterious man's, everyone felt like they were being lovey-dovey. At the same time, they were also guessing in their hearts. Could it be that this man was right? Leng Shi was his destined bride? For someone like Qin Qingqing, who had a rich imagination, She had already imagined an unparalleled love from her previous life. The man's eyelids trembled. He didn't say anything and waved his hand. Before anyone could react, they found that their line of sight had shifted. When they came back to their senses, they found themselves outside the castle. Their backpacks and food were on the ground beside them. Qin Qingqing stared at herself in a daze, then looked at the people around her. She then looked at the ghost castle in the distance, which was still shrouded in dark clouds. She pinched herself hard, still in disbelief. I'm out. The pain from her body told her that this wasn't a dream. Qing Ge, who was standing beside her, couldn't help but smile. That's right, we're really out. Qin Qingqing suddenly screamed in excitement, and then threw herself onto Qing Ji's body. She hugged him and shouted, "We're out! We're out of that damned place alive! I'm still alive!" Qing Ge felt a little uncomfortable when his body was hugged. However, he quickly relaxed and gave Qin Qingqing a hug as well. That's right. We're out alive. At a time like this, what could make people happier than a hug from their companions? They stood there excitedly for a while, then looked worriedly at the castle. Leng Shi was still inside. Zhang Chao thought for a while and said, "Since Leng Shi said that there wouldn't be any problems, it means that she's confident." Shuiwan nodded. She said, "I think we don't have to worry about Shuiwan. That mysterious man in purple is obviously infatuated with her to the bone. He won't hurt her." Everyone thought so and felt that it should be so. After completely relaxing, Qin Qingqing suddenly thought of a problem. She said with a bitter expression, "We told the driver that we would pick him up in 10 days. But it's only been 2 days." Hearing this, everyone turned around to take a look. There was a vast expanse of yellow sand, and not a single person could be seen. So the question was, how were they going to return? Everyone. Zhang Chao slowly put his backpack on his shoulder and said with a smile, "This adventure has unexpectedly ended prematurely. It seems that we can only have a healthy walk." The others also laughed. They had just escaped from such a place. So for them, anything that they encountered now was basically nothing. One by one, they picked up their bags and walked in the opposite direction of the castle. At this moment, Zhang Chao suddenly turned around to take a look. Chapter 1772. That woman had a perfect and delicate face. She wore a gorgeous robe carved out of ice and snow, and wore a noble crown on her head. The moment her real body descended into the fire, the temperature of the entire place dropped. The flames seemed to have met their natural enemy, and they trembled and extinguished. On that day, Nicholas finally knew that he was not some lowly bastard, but the child of God. The snow goddess, who was traveling the continent in the incarnation of the snow goddess, fell in love with the Violet Duke at first sight, and developed a romantic relationship with him. And Nicholas was the result of this relationship. Not long after the snow goddess gave birth to Nicholas, she returned to the divine realm, and the Violet Duke, who was a playboy by nature, quickly forgot his beautiful lover. Although she did not have many feelings for Nicholas, the snow goddess was still angry about what happened to him, which was rare. In the eyes of God, the way the people of this country treated her child was an indirect blasphemy. She took Nicholas away on the spot and personally gave him God's punishment. The whole country was ravaged by snow and ice for an entire year. Food could not be grown, and countless people froze to death or starved to death. The rule of the whole country began to be in danger. No one dared to blame God, so they all vented their anger on the family that mistreated Nicholas. The Duke and the Princess lived in fear every day, deeply afraid that they would be retaliated against by the rioting people if they went out one day. But in the end, they still did not escape. The Holy See, which had once condemned Nicholas as a heretic, reached an agreement with the royal family. They personally tied up the Violet Duke and the Princess, and made them kneel in front of the altar. They also said that they were willing to pay any price, just for the great snow goddess to appease her anger. In the end, the Violet Duke, his princess wife, and the child who was born with a noble status were forever exiled from the country, and Nicholas became the new Violet Duke. Because of his bloodline, Nicholas was almost immortal. He had experienced countless dynasties, and he had seen countless emperors ascend the throne and die. He even controlled the change of royal power in this huge dynasty. He became the most powerful man in this dynasty, and no one had any objections. Until he finally grew tired of this world. Thus, he sealed himself in his castle and fell into a deep slumber. Gu Xingyin's heart skipped a beat when she finished reading these memories. This man seemed to be of noble status, but he must have lived a very lonely life, right? Otherwise, he wouldn't have sealed himself into a deep slumber. A pair of hands reached out and covered her eyes. I told you not to look at me like that. I won't be able to control myself. A low and hoarse voice sounded in her ears. Besides, I'm not as pitiful as you think. I sealed myself because I felt that the world was too boring, and I desperately wanted to see my bride. Gu Xingyin reached out to grab his hand and pulled it down. She looked at him in surprise. By the way, you haven't told me why you call me your bride. And how do you know that I'm your bride? Chapter 1776. Nicholas chuckled softly when he heard this. Gu Xingyin was puzzled. What are you laughing at? She recalled what she had just said, and didn't think there was anything wrong with it. The next moment, Nicholas' figure appeared beside her. The two sat on the swing together, and the golden sunlight shone on his God-given face. Gu Xingyin looked up at him, and her breath caught slightly. Nicholas said with a smile, I can actually understand what you mean. In my time, people also pursued beauty. Every time the Violet Duke went out, the carriage was specially made, because there would be many men and women who admired the Duke's beauty and tried everything to get close to him. According to the customs at that time, this kind of thing was a beautiful thing. Nicholas couldn't be angry because of this, and even punished those who challenged the Duke's dignity. Hearing Nicholas's words, Gu Xingyin almost fell into his arms with laughter. She could imagine what a spectacular scene it would be. Nicholas just gently reached out his hand to support her back, to prevent his lover from falling because of the intense movements. Time passed quickly. In the blink of an eye, it was the wedding day that Shuewan had promised. Gu Xingyin and Nicholas came to the address that Shuewan had told them. Before entering the hotel, the two were baptized by countless gazes. There were even several hot beauties who had the courage to strike up a conversation with Nicholas, completely ignoring the fact that he had a female companion with him. Gu Xingyin helplessly curved her lips and said to Nicholas, I knew that I would face such treatment when I was with you. Nicholas glanced at the many gazes that were looking in his direction. He could clearly see that most of these gazes were from men. These people were not interested in him. Did his bride not realize that her attractiveness to men was not much weaker than her attractiveness to women? At this time the groom Li Chang noticed this side. When he saw Gu Xingyin, he smiled and hurried over to greet her. Lung Sure, you're here? Everyone is here, except for you. At this moment, he also saw Nicholas standing behind Gu Xingyin. The smile on Li Chang's face froze. Of course he recognized Nicholas. At that time, this man had left a deep impression on them. And this one, Gu Xingyin promptly added. My husband, you can call him Filton. Nicholas continued Gu Xingyin's words and said calmly. He nodded slightly at Li Chang and said in a restrained and reserved tone, Mr. Li Chang, I wish you a happy marriage. Li Chang's entire body stiffened. Facing this man, he found that he would always inadvertently become nervous. Thank you, Mr. Felton. Even when he addressed Nicholas, he could not help but use honorifics. Nicholas's expression was not unnatural at all. He was already used to people treating him with such respect. Li Chang brought the two of them to a place in the hall. Nicholas hugged Gu Xingyin's waist and watched as the cars disappeared from his sight. It's finally just the two of us, he mumbled. Gu Xingyin couldn't help laughing. No matter how arrogant and reserved this man was in front of others, he was always affectionate and clingy in front of her. She couldn't help holding his hand. From now on, we have enough time to be together. Just the two of us. Just you and me. Chapter 1780. As soon as the last world ended, Gu Xingyin couldn't wait to start the next mission. When Gu Xingyin came to this world, she found herself in a quiet classroom. The students beside her were all quiet, and she was lying on the desk. Obviously, The owner of this body was sleeping. The female student in the fourth position on the left of the fifth row. The one in yellow, please answer my question. A cold and restrained voice sounded in the quiet classroom. With a whoosh, countless eyes gathered in Gu Xingyin's direction. Gu Xingyin. According to her experience, there was an 80% chance that she was the girl in the fourth position on the left of the fifth row. He looked down and sure enough, she was wearing a light yellow knitted coat today. She subconsciously raised her head and stood up. Gu Xingyin met the eyes of the person on the podium. Teacher. She opened her mouth and shouted. The man on the podium was expressionless. Is there a problem? This student? Gu Xingyin quickly shook her head. She was just using this opportunity to let the system, who had just come to this world, give her a cheat. Then, Gu Xingyin opened her mouth and said a long sentence in a very clear tone. The person on the podium listened very seriously. When Gu Xingyin finished, he waved his hand and told her to sit down. This student just now answered very well. She has her own opinions. Next Gu Xingyin quietly let out a sigh of relief. Thank you, system. The host is too polite. Begin the transmission of the world's plot. She said. Yes, host. Gu Xingyin slowly looked at the plot of this world. The original Zhang Yu was a second-year student in a university's literature department. She was considered to be an excellent student, with a good family background and a very beautiful face. This girl had a very silly personality. She liked anime web novels and 2D novels. She was always half a beat slower when communicating with people, and often made some small jokes. Her friends jokingly called her Zhang Mengmeng. In short, this was a girl with a very likable personality, appearance, and overall very likable. The mission target of this world, Deng Huijun, was considered Zhang Yu's cousin in terms of relationship. Deng Huijun's mother and Zhang Yu's mother were biological sisters. However, the two families never had much contact because Deng Huijun's mother, Zhao Li, was taken by a married man and got pregnant out of wedlock. She fell out with her family and insisted on being with that man. The Zhao family had been a family of scholars since the previous dynasty. They were especially strict with the education of their children. This matter disappointed Zhang Yu's grandmother's family. From then on, they treated it as if they never had this daughter. Deng Huijun's mother, Zhao Li, was also a schemer. Chapter 1781. Of course, Zhao Li felt unbalanced in her heart. Over time, this kind of imbalance twisted into a kind of resentment towards her family. Not only her father and brothers, but even her sister Zhao Qing, who was married off, became the target of resentment. Zhao Li originally thought that her life was complete. So what if she was looked down upon as a mistress? In the end, didn't she defeat all those who used to laugh at her and successfully marry into a rich family? However, once she saw her sister Zhao Qing, Zhao Li's heart felt very uneasy. The Zhang family's family background was not worse than the Deng family's. But Zhang Yu's father, Zhang Qiqing, was much younger and more handsome than her husband, Deng Yuanlin. Moreover, the two of them fell in love freely. The Zhang family also liked Zhao Qing very much as their daughter-in-law. Zhao Li thought that her looks and methods were not inferior to her sister, Zhao Qing. However, she had spent a lot of effort, suffered a lot of disdain before she got what she wanted. However, Zhao Qing easily held it in her hands. She was really unbalanced. Deng Huijun was influenced by her mother since she was young. Naturally, she did not have any good feelings towards the Zhang family. Similarly, she was very disgusted with her aunt, who was the Zhang family's wife. She was 6 years older than Zhang Yu. After she graduated with a master's degree, she chose to teach at a university. It was also by chance that Deng Huijun found out that her cousin, who was born from her aunt, was also admitted to a university. She went back and told her mother, Zhao Li, about this matter. Zhao Li knew about Zhang Yu. She had 3 siblings in her family, her eldest brother, her and her youngest sister Zhao Qing. She heard that Zhao Qing's daughter was very doted on at home. In the Zhao family, she was also the apple of her parents' eye. However, her daughter Deng Huijun had never even stepped through the door of her grandmother's house. Zhao Li was very unreconciled. She and her daughter Deng Huijun discussed for a long time. Deng Huijun came up with a plan. Mom, Didn't you say that my grandfather's family pretended to be virtuous, old-fashioned, and inflexible? Think about it. If my obedient and cute cousin became a rebellious girl on the streets who was entangled with a married man, would they still recognize her as their granddaughter? From that day onwards, Deng Huijun began to deliberately approach Zhang Yu. In her opinion, a 20-year-old girl like Zhang Yu would be easily attracted to the outside world. Zhang Yu didn't know this cousin of hers, but under Deng Huijun's repeated coincidences, the two of them quickly became familiar with each other. Gradually, Deng Huijun began to take Zhang Yu to bars several times unintentionally. She even introduced Zhang Yu to several handsome men,